Hello and welcome to episode 205 of our SAP on Azure video podcast. Today is August 22nd, and together with Robert and Goran, we are here to talk about anything related to SAP and Microsoft. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
So today's session is pretty special for me on multiple fronts. For one, our guest, Noopur Vaishnav, has been on the show the first time about a year ago. At that time, she was an intern at Microsoft. In the meantime, quite a few things have changed. Noopur is now working as a full-time employee at Microsoft, and we are lucky to get her back in our team. The other cool thing is that Noopur has continued to work on Copilots and SAP. A few episodes back, we already talked about how Copilot Studio can be used to create integrations with SAP, and today Noopur can give us additional insights on how you can do that in the very same way. So, Noopur, welcome back to our podcast. Before we dive into the topic, for those of our viewers that have not seen the previous show, maybe we can start by a quick introduction from you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Noopur, and I just finished my master's degree in engineering management from Duke University. I did intern in Microsoft on the SAP and Azure team last year as a product manager. And so right now I also joined full-time as a product manager. Before that, I did my undergrad in computer science, and I do have experience working in SAP Ariba as a software engineer. And then I also worked shortly in a industrial IoT startup as a product manager before doing my master's. And now I'm super happy to be back working both on SAP and Microsoft.
Perfect. Well, I mean, we were really lucky that first of all you came back to Microsoft, and then that you also joined our team. So I think this is really cool. And maybe this is you're a role model for a lot of other students who also want to join Microsoft. So again, I'm super happy to have you back at Microsoft.
Yeah, I'm super happy to be back too. When you get the offer, you don't really know, like when you get a new grad offer, you don't really know which team you're going to be joining. So I think until the week before I joined, I didn't know if I would be returning to the same team, and I was super happy to be back. Yeah.
Cool. Well, perfect. Good. And ever since you joined, you've been very busy. You continued, or you took on also additional challenges, but you also continue to take a look at Copilot Studio and SAP. And as I just mentioned a few episodes back, we also had Robert Hernandez. We had a few other colleagues on the show that talked about the Copilot Studio and SAP integration. And I think one video that Robert also showed was actually something that you had developed, that you had created. So maybe we can start by looking at the announcement that was created around this. You also created a blog post. So maybe we can start taking a look at that so that potentially other customers, other partners can also follow this blog post and repeat basically what you have created.
Yeah. I'd be happy to share that. So I'll share my screen and share the blog posts. There are, let me know when you can see my screen.
Yes, I can see it. Yeah.
So there are basically two blog posts. The first one kind of introduces the integration of Copilot Studio with SAP. And this blog post basically describes how, at first introduces it and talks about how it's really cool that if you have Power Platform, you can access both SAP data, which has data on your enterprise processes, as well as, your collaboration data through the Microsoft Graph. And both of them are very easily integratable while you are working on Power Platform or Copilot Studio. And then we also have the piece that you wrote where you kind of explain the different ways that Microsoft and SAP are collaborating on AI, which I think that Robert spoke more about on his podcast. The previous episode. And so then we kind of dig in to show actually in action, not only just words, by taking an example of a scenario where we actually integrate both SAP data and Microsoft Graph data together to come up with a scenario to actually help someone solve a problem. And I think Robert did show the demo previously, and maybe I'll go back into the demo a bit later. But essentially the scenario is that, let's say you're a salesperson and you get an inquiry from a customer, and you kind of want about a sales order, and you kind of want to dig deep into the sales order. And for that, you kind of just have this one copilot that is developed, the SAP Copilot. And the SAP Copilot can go and dig in information directly from the SAP system. So you can figure out the status of the order and, what the fields are in the SAP system. And at the same time, you also can, most of the discussions about an order actually happen via Teams or email. So at the same time, you can actually also find out more contextual information about the order through your Teams chat. So when the salesperson interacts with this Copilot, all the salesperson has to do is type in, the order number, and the Copilot gives the salesperson a holistic view of the entire sales order from, like I said, the conversations around it, why it was delayed, and also whether it's delayed. So yeah, it was kind of like a useful scenario to show all of, Azure, OpenAI, Copilot Studio, Teams, and Power Platform, all of them integrating together to sort of help actually solve a problem. And then kind of this, the video looks great, but actually show what components actually went inside, so that even if a non-technical person looks at this, they can figure out where, when you see the video, you just see the Teams interface, you don't really know what technology is going is basically playing a role behind the scenes. And so there's like a technical diagram to show, okay, yeah, this is the Teams interface, and now you have this interface is basically because you deployed a Copilot Studio bot, which has different topics, which are different functionalities. And, within each functionality, you're basically calling a Power Automate flow, which is where you get to access, the SAP data from the ERP connector, or now there's the OData connector too, with single sign-on, so that makes it a lot easier. And then you can also access Microsoft Graph data. And once you have all the data, the next thing you do, obviously now, is put all that data, and you have all the data, and now you just send it to AI to kind of make sense of the data and summarize it for you, which is where you have the Azure OpenAI Studio. So you basically, all these 4 components basically work in harmony to create the scenario that Robert showed. And so this blog basically goes into the detail about the different technologies and how you can download them. And also, to make it easier for people to get started with all these technologies, there is a GitHub repo, which I'll show after I talk about the next blog. But yeah, so this basically, the first blog just gives the AI part of it and shows the magic of, like I said, Teams and SAP data. And the next blog is actually, once you've created, your initial bot, you kind of want to make it more secure and you want to make it look better. So this is where another 2 technologies come into play. Number one is the adaptive cards. That is a very nice feature that Microsoft Teams very easily integrates into it. So, when you have data, it's on Teams, if you can just imagine viewing a bunch of numbers, it doesn't always look very appealing and you don't know where it came from. So if you have adaptive cards, you can actually control the way your users are able to view that data. So here you can see, like you would have seen in the demo, that because the data is coming from the SAP system, you can add the SAP logo to show that this is not AI generated data, this is actual data from the SAP system. So, you can trust this. Like, you can trust it and not read into it. And this is just raw data. And then there would also be the Teams data, where you would have, you would have data from the Teams messages and all of that, where you have links to show that it's from Microsoft Team and it's AI summarized, basically. And so again, you can create these adaptive cards to show, like here you can see the order is blocked, and so it stands out. And then you can also have adaptive cards, instead of typing in everything into a chat, sometimes you can also have a more organized way of inputting information into the SAP system. And the blog also goes through how to create adaptive cards in Copilot Studio. And I'll show that a bit later when I go into the Copilot Studio. And then lastly, there's also principal propagation. So basically, let's say you're a Microsoft Teams user that you have this Copilot installed, downloaded onto your Teams platform. But every time you want to talk to the system, you have to keep entering your SAP user credentials. And that kind of like would take more time. You may as well just think that, oh, I could just go onto my SAP system and log in and check the information. But because of principal propagation, and now there is the OData SSO connector, which makes it even easier, you can directly, like, let's say I have a Microsoft user. With my Microsoft email ID, it's kind of mapped to my SAP user, which has all the authorizations that I need to basically tells me can access my SAP user through my Microsoft email and can make sure that me or any other user, we can't access any SAP information that we're not allowed to access. So it's not like now I have this AI bot that is plugged into my SAP system and it can just access everything. No, it's very user dependent. And it was a very important thing to implement this so that it kind of is more seamless and at the same time makes it more secure. So there are multiple steps that Martin has created and sort of multiple blogs that Martin has created on how to implement this. And now also just last week, like I mentioned, there's a SSO or data connector that you can just directly use. So that makes things a lot easier. And now I'll actually go into the GitHub repo.
Now, before you go there, let's very quickly summarize, because I think there are so many things, especially, for example, if we compare what you had done during your internship, where you basically just showed how Copilot can interact with SAP. I think now the whole scenario evolved quite a bit. So the first thing that I really loved was that we are not only connecting to the SAP system. So this is a typical task that we would see today, that a user opens up maybe an SAP Fiori application, they look up a certain sales order and they see that it's blocked. So this is the information that you would typically get, and that's all. Now, in your specific case, I'm in Teams, I asked a question about a sales order, but the beautiful thing is I not only get the information back from the SAP system, but I also get relevant, related information back from emails and Teams messages. And I think that's for me one of the key benefits that I see with a Copilot integration. Because here it's not only that my task is to see the status of a sales order. Okay, I can do this. But here Copilot provides me with additional information that I might not even have thought about. I mean, maybe I received an email that this sales order was delayed because of a strike or a weather condition, but maybe I forgot it. And here, Copilot provides me with the up-to-date information of the sales order, with context from emails, content from Teams messages. So this holistic view, that is the first thing that I really love about this new scenario. The next thing is exactly what you talked about with the adaptive cards that we can also see here. I mean, obviously, returning text to Copilot is great, but it's not necessarily visually compelling. But with the Visual Studio, with the adaptive cards, you build a really nice representation of the data. So I think that was also great. The other thing is with these adaptive cards, you can not only read the data and show it, but you can also create, or in this specific case, update information in the SAP system. And instead of doing a lot of questions, answer, question, answer, question, answer in the Copilot chat, you have one adaptive card where you fill in, this is the sales order, this is the material number, this is the quantity, and then you click on submit, and that's it. So I like this combination of having a chat-based approach, but then also having the adaptive card that summarizes the user interaction. And then obviously the final thing is the whole single sign-on topic, because obviously you especially if we roll this out to an enterprise with hundreds or thousands of users, then you cannot expect the users to provide their username and password all the time, because obviously they also change, so you need to update them all the time. So that's not an enterprise-ready solution. But since you have now implemented single sign-on, there's no need for this anymore. You just log in with your Microsoft credentials, with your Entra ID, which you also need to connect to Teams, obviously. And from there, you are authenticated towards the SAP system. So I really like how this scenario evolved from a year ago to now. And honestly, I'm really looking forward to having you again on the show in a year from now. And then we'll see an even more powerful Copilot and SAP integration. So
Yeah,
fantastic.
I mean, I think the last 1 year ago, there was no Copilot Studio, it was Power Virtual Agents.
Yes.
And I think when I joined back, I was like, wow, everything just, all the technologies just escalated in terms of AI. Like everything just became it became so much easier to implement. And yeah.
Cool. And now, speaking of implementing, the cool thing is you not only created this blog post, but you also created a GitHub repository to make it easier to get started. So maybe now we can take a look at the GitHub repo.
Yeah. So one sec. Yeah, so this is basically the GitHub repo where, you basically come to the GitHub repo after the blog, but even if you just directly come to the GitHub repo, you can still get a summary of the entire use cases that the GitHub solution is actually implementing. And so you have the first scenario from the first blog, which is just, like I said, getting information from the SAP system and getting the Teams chats and all of that. And then you also have the second scenario where, like I mentioned, you add in the adaptive card way of presenting the information as well as principal propagation. So all of this is basically, like I showed before, composed of Copilot Studio flows, Power Automate flows, and Power Automate flows. So it's just to make it easier for everyone, we actually decided to put out the flows that I used to create the scenario. So basically, all you have to do is, if you want to replicate the scenario, you have to have, there are some prerequisites like having the Copilot Studio account. I mean, the Copilot Studio account and a M365 developer account. But once you have all of those things, all you need to do to actually implement the logic of it is go in and go to this GitHub repo, and you have steps to recreate the whole thing, even if you want to start from scratch with all the prerequisites listed and exactly step by step on how to even get started with Copilot Studio. And you have the same for the second scenario, like a whole PDF of instructions. And then you also have these Power Automate flows, which you can see all these Power Automate flows are kind of referred to in the instructions. So you'll know which Power Automate flow does what. But you can very easily just go to any Power Automate flow and download it. And here, and here you actually have the instructions on how you can import this Power Automate flow onto your own environment and use it as is. Like I said, there are some restrictions, like you need to have some prerequisites in place, which are again in the PDF, like you need to have an SAP connection. But other than that, once you have all of that, it's very easy to just import. So like I said, I just downloaded the Automate solution that I showed, and I can just go to downloads.
So that basically means that I don't have to recreate the Power Automate flow, but it's there. I need to adjust it obviously a little. I mean, from a connections point of view, that's exactly what we're seeing here now, because obviously I need to connect this to my SAP system. But all the steps that are part of the Power Automate flow are then already available to me.
Yeah. And so here I can just say that this is the SAP connection that I want, and you can definitely create a new one too. And then you can import it.
And as you said, all of this is documented also in the PDF document. All the files are there in the GitHub repo, so it should be fairly easy for anyone to get started with this.
Yes. And this scenario is just a starting point, but all of these individual components, like the M365, you have to save it as a new flow. Even this step is written in GitHub. And so, yeah, once you save it as a new flow, you have all the logic that I used. You may have to, again, like touch base on the SAP ERP to make sure the parameters, because I removed all the authentication parameters that we used. So that's why it's not as is. You have to add your own authentication, like app server ID, client ID,
which makes
system
sense.
number, and all of
Exactly.
that. Yeah.
I mean,
and then once you have that, there's even the JSON that we use to parse the SAP response. But yeah, like I said, these are just individual components that this is a great use case. But once you have these different building blocks, you can create your own scenarios in any case. Now, once you have the flow imported into your Power Automate, you can just copy this part and add it into your own flow. So you can do a lot of things just by having these flows. Yeah. So
cool. But this is just, I mean, just the Power Automate flows.
yeah.
So how does it work? Who calls these Power Automate flows?
Yeah. So, like we talked about earlier, that's where the Copilot Studio comes in. The Copilot Studio, a part of it has not, you can't really export the whole solution right now and import it into a new environment, which is why only the Power Automate flows are there on GitHub. But the Copilot Studio is very easy to use. So there are steps on how to create your new Copilot on Copilot Studio. So yeah, you could use those. The first step would be to actually create a Copilot Studio account and create a new Copilot, which there is a lot of resources that I have linked on the instructions page. And then once you create a new Copilot and enable AI, there is some magical thing here that actually makes everything work, and that's called topics. And so what topics is and how this is actually different than Power Virtual Agents or anything before is that now, for example, let's say I am creating a functionality. Basically, this functionality is getting information about the sales order. And so now when I create this functionality, I have kind of given a description on what the topic does. And like this, there are going to be different functionalities. Like if you see in the demo video, there is like finding substitute items for an order or checking material availability. I'll just show you for. Yeah. So for example, here I'm describing in this, the first step for me to do is kind of describe the intention of what the topic does. And this is kind of where the AI part comes in Copilot Studio, is that now I have these descriptions, and let's say I enter a chat into the Copilot. Now the Copilot Studio uses AI to understand the intent of what I would ask. Like, let's say I would enter into the Copilot, get me all sales order. And now the Copilot Studio would use AI to sift through all the topics that I created, understand what each of them does, and pick out the topic that could best answer my question or best perform the functionality. So there's no need for you to map. Like I think a lot of like AI tools before, you would have to map the user intent to the logic of what would happen. Like if the user says this, then you can do this. But because of Copilot Studio, you just have to enter the information, and Copilot Studio takes care of the rest of it as to figuring out what functionality the user wants. And so
I think in the past it was really there were certain trigger words that you basically needed, and if you didn't use these trigger words, then your flow it didn't work. But here you describe what the topic is all about, and then the AI basically takes care that, okay, what you just wrote probably fits this description. So I will start with this trigger here, or with this topic.
Yeah, exactly. And so this part is actually the most important part. This is the description. And this is I actually just told Copilot, oh, I want to create a topic that does this. Can you create a Copilot Studio description? And it just created this description for me. So I could just, plug it in. I didn't even have to phrase it properly. So I think AI knows how AI works. So it created a good enough description. Yeah. And so once you have that, like you see, you can use the Copilot Studio interface, which is going to be deployed on Teams, to get customer information. And then you also have something called entities. Like for example, let's say a user enters like let's say you ask the user what is the customer number you want, and the user enters my customer number is, XYZ. And now the Copilot, you can create an entity where it can just extract the customer number from the information. And so that's kind of like your variable. And then that kind of, once you get the customer numbers, where the logical part comes and the data and the whole SAP part comes in. And so that's when you kind of move in to Power Automate to execute that flow for you. So you essentially use Copilot Studio to kind of figure out what the customer wants, what the user wants, and get initial information from the user. But when you're actually executing logic, in terms of complex logic, you can go into, that's where you have to sort of call Power Automate flows. And there are ways in Copilot Studio where you can directly plug in your enterprise data and work with it. But like I said, if you want a more complex flow, like for example, how I'm using M365 data as well as SAP data, you kind of tend to go towards the Power Automate route and create it that way. And like I said here, now instead of doing this part where you create the whole entity and all of that to identify the customer number, sometimes you want a more straightforward way. So this is where you can kind of create an adaptive card. And the adaptive card is, you just have to go here and ask with an adaptive card. So it then creates this adaptive card information, sort of palette for you. And then after that, you can go and edit it's all in JSON. And so you can go and edit the code and it'll come up like this. So you can test it. And there's also something called an adaptive card designer, which has a lot of more information on what components you can use and how to make it look nicer.
And it's also a really nice editor where you can actually see the results already. So typically what I do is I go to the designer, I do create everything there, and then I just copy and paste the results over here. Maybe there's a few things that you still need to adjust than here, but it's a little easier because you have a little more space, you have a little more visual representation, but it works pretty well.
Yeah, and so like you can do it directly within the Copilot Studio. And then once you get the information from here, again, you can send that information to Power Automate and complete the rest of the flow. And the Copilot Studio is super cool because you can just, test your Copilot. And then whenever you're ready, you can, publish your Copilot. Like for example, here, I could just publish it. And then you can basically, it takes a bit of time to publish it, but you can publish it to different channels. Like here you have channels, and you can, depending on what your company has enabled for you, you can publish it to Teams or a whole new demo website or anything like that. So doesn't only have to be on Teams as well, but Teams is easier to actually use for a business use case. So that's about Copilot Studio and
that's fantastic, actually. I think also this publishing to channels, we always talk about Teams right now, but as you said, you can publish this to a demo website, but you also can publish this to a custom website. So think of a scenario where you potentially even have an SAP Fiori app, and you could embed this Copilot in the Fiori app as well. We can see here there are different channels as well. I've not tried it on Facebook or something like that, but maybe you're using Slack in your company, and then again you could publish this chatbot to Slack so that users from there can interact with the SAP system.
Yeah, and I think also soon, Microsoft announced this a while back, that soon you'll actually be able to publish it to Copilot for M365. So let's say you have Copilot on your system, you can actually launch your Copilot to function with the M365 Copilot. So that'll be super cool when that launches too.
Absolutely. And then you have these plugins functionalities so that you can enable then an SAP plugin in M365, very much to what we have with the official S/4HANA and Copilot integration, for example, where there's really an S/4HANA plugin that you enable, and then we would also do the same thing here directly from Copilot Studio. That's really nice.
I'm always impressed how we have certain boxes that are doing the stuff like connectors, and then you wrap it into Power Automate, and then the OpenAI comes and you just add that box, and then now it's coming after 1 year, right? Or the Copilot part, and then come and you just plug it in a new box into existing boxes, right? And then also the authentication. So meaning you're just building, on new stuff or adding the new stuff on the top of the existing or combine it. So, and that's really impressive. I have to say, really impressive. Yeah. How
Yeah,
easy
it's like
it is.
an entire ecosystem, and
Yeah.
Fantastic. Noopur, I think this was really great to see, and thank you so much for giving us a look behind the scenes, basically. So I hope everyone has seen the video of this scenario. We'll have all the links to get you started in the show notes. So hopefully lots of customers, lots of partners will take a look at this. As you said, everything is documented in the GitHub repo. There are some great, very detailed PDFs that guide you step by step to make this happen. And it would be fantastic to see customers actually really implementing this, enhancing it with their own specific scenarios. So thank you so much for this.
Yeah, and I would love to hear any feedback about, whether if anyone uses the GitHub and you have any maybe you want to get instructions in a different way, or maybe you want to implement a different type of scenario. So any of that kind of feedback you can post on GitHub here.
Just create an issue.
Discussions, yeah.
Or
And here you can create an idea. Yeah, any of that. Yeah.
Perfect. And then maybe if we have lots of new ideas, then maybe we'll have you back on the show soon with an enhanced version of the Copilot Studio and SAP integration. I mean, again, I'm super impressed. I think this is a fantastic showcase, or not actually only a showcase, really fantastic scenarios that can bring even today a lot of value to customers in this context of an AI digital assistant with SAP. So I'm definitely looking forward to the next things that you're doing in this area.
Yeah, I'm super happy to be working on these things too. So yeah.
Oh, good. Well, with this, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see us again next week.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.